Welcome to Small Talk by Sfarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. On this episode of Small Talk, I'm going to be joined by Rabbi Yakov Danishevksy, who is the author of Attached, as well as the forthcoming book, The Delight of Shabbos, and the book, or the Haggadah, we'll be discussing on this episode of the Attached Haggadah. So thank you, Rabbi Danishevksy, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
What can you tell the listeners about this Haggadah?
This Haggadah is very unique in that it is really about going on an inner journey of Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's not so much a collection of Divrei Torah or insights into specific words. It's actually really meant not so much as something that a person is going to have Vartlach to say over at the Seder. It's really about coming to a place of understanding what your personal Mitzrayim has been in your life, different aspects that each person experiences of Mitzrayim, of a paro in their life, of an avdus in their life, of a servitude, and how Hashem and how in their life they've experienced the process and a journey of leaving Mitzrayim into a deeper freedom.
When I do a podcast or a Small Talk on Haggadah, and there's been a bunch of them this year, the question inevitably always is, why another Haggadah, right? Manishtana Haggadah has mikol Haggadahs, right? And I think you address that in the beginning of your Haggadah. So if you can address that here to the listener, I'm sure you got this question. You're getting this question.
Yeah, no, Baruch Shekivanti, the introduction of the Haggadah is called Manishtana Haggadah Zu. And I think what is different in this Haggadah really is that it's a Haggadah written for our generation specifically. Our generation that experiences a world of the inside of each person. People experience their emotions, they experience inner challenges and inner opportunities, awareness of their deeper self that is more on the surface for many, many people than possibly has ever been before. And this Haggadah is written for that. It's not a Haggadah, as I mentioned before. I actually don't even quote any sources. This Haggadah is meant as an experience. It's something that is bringing a person into a deeper connection with themselves and what the process, what the order, what the Seder is really meant to do for us on the inside, how we're supposed to experience it, how we're supposed to feel it, what we're supposed to be thinking about. And it really brings a language and a richness of concepts that I believe speak very uniquely to our time, to our generation.
And that's something interesting you mentioned right there. So we can talk about it here already, even though usually as later, you mentioned you don't quote any sources whatsoever. And that's interesting because usually most Sfarim, most Haggadahs, they quote the sources. This is the source, that source. So you decided not to quote any sources. Is that because most of the thoughts, or really the Haggadah, is from you? Or are there sources, though, that were influential on you and on this Haggadah?
Yeah, there's definitely a whole world of sources that are deeply influential on the Haggadah, and I think really are what informed the ideas that came out in the Haggadah. But the reason I didn't quote any sources was because as I myself was writing it, and really what my intention is for the person reading it, is that it's not something that's about the analysis of the text. It's not about, can I find a proof for this or not find a proof for this? I have no issue if a person doesn't like the idea I wrote. My goal is not that you absorb the specific content of the perush I had on the words Yachol Meir Chodesh. That's if you like my idea on Yachol Meir Chodesh, that's a loss in my eyes. What really the goal is that it makes you have to think about what you're doing at the Seder in a deeper way, and in a way that, again, I think speaks to the uniqueness of our generation. It's funny, I was speaking recently, and there was a lady who came to after the speech, came up to buy the Haggadah, and she said, I'm so excited to buy this. My husband loves having new Divrei Torah to say over at the Seder every year. And I wanted to say to her, I thank you so much. That's so nice, but I actually don't think your husband's going to like my Haggadah. The idea here is it's not about the sources. And I actually felt that putting in all the sources would detract from the capacity to actually experience something. That's really what the Seder is supposed to be. How do you see yourself? Do you know yourself? Do you know Mitzrayim? Do you know what Yetzias Mitzrayim is? How do you find all of those things in your life?
Right, which is, let's look more at that theme. Okay, that's the point of the Seder, right? As you're saying, but it's also about Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's about the Gula. So you start off, you're the second part of your introduction is the inner child at the Seder, and then you go through piece by piece. I thought what's interesting also is, and because I guess by nature of this style Haggadah, you have on everything. You have on Bir Chametz, Bittul Chametz, you'll have on Kadesh, you'll have on all the many Haggadahs, and they're just, especially if just a compilation of the Torah, kind of skip those parts, right? It's just focused on Magid and then working around the other parts. You really go through each part. So if you want to start by exploring more of that theme in general, and then going through some examples that the listener can get a feel and a flavor for the attached Haggadah.
Sure. So the concept of the inner child is that each person, as they develop, doesn't necessarily become one integrated whole self. So each of us is walking around as a person that looks like one person, but actually on the inside, we might be experiencing the world through the lens of multiple people, so to speak. That there's myself, that's my current, most updated, most developed adult self. And then I also carry younger versions of myself that see the world through their lens. I have maybe a 6-year-old part of me that is experiencing the world now still from the perspective of what he was experiencing back as a 6-year-old or a 14-year-old, etc. And so the idea is that some of us experience aspects, all of us, I should say, experience aspects of our lives that are our Mitzrayim, as is explained in the Svarim. Mitzrayim is the letters Meitzarim. It's the constrictions of our lives. And in those constrictions, in those Meitzarim, we develop these younger selves that might actually adapt to those constrictions in a way that now in our lives we're not so happy with. But back then, those ways of adapting made sense. And they are still stuck in Mitzrayim, in their Meitzar. Even now, 20 years, 40, 50 years later, that 6-year-old self is still experiencing the world in his or her Meitzar. And the process of Yetzias Mitzrayim is us in our current version going back inside ourselves and facilitating that process that really HaKadosh Baruch Hu facilitated, but we are bringing it to the surface and shining that light of what the Yetzias Mitzrayim has been. And so, as you said, it's not only on a specific word here or there in Magid, it's actually the entire process of the Seder from beginning to end.
Right, and that's an interesting thought for sure, but definitely the Haggadah, though, beyond that, is really about Geula and Yetzias Mitzrayim. So, just to point that out, I'm right. That's
yeah, but there's a paradox in that as well, because the minhag of many people is after the whole thing we go right back to Shir Hashirim, and Shir Hashirim is the story of two people who never actually meet. So even in the
let's turn to the Haggadah itself, and I'll leave it to you if you want to pick from the classic Halachman, Yomanishtan, or other parts of Magid. You want to pick something more interesting. You want to talk about, like I said in the beginning, go about Karpas and going back Kadesh and Bir Chametz and Kol Chamir and so on. Wherever you want to pick from, if you can give one example or two for the listener.
Sure. So a couple things I would mention. First of all, Kadesh Orchatz, just as we start. Kadesh Orchatz, I think, is a very interesting. Sure. So as you brought up, the Haggadah is about Mitzrayim, but it's really about Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it's about Geula. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is that who is holding the Afikomen at the end of the Seder, at least in most people's minhag, right? The one holding the Afikomen at the end of the Seder is the child. So this child that we're focused on trying to help him or her emerge from their Mitzrayim that they might still be stuck in. On the other hand, they're the one actually holding the key. They have the prize at the end, because the experience that each of us has gone through of our Mitzrayim also contains within it our Rechush Gadol, our greatness, our capacity to do something very special in this world. And I think that really is Yachatz. Yachatz really, I think, holds the secret of the whole Haggadah and really of the whole world of life. Yachatz, we take one matzah. It starts as one whole matzah. And we crack it in half, because while each of us starts whole, we each come into this world as a pure neshama, as a shining neshama. But then in the challenges, the Mitzrayim of life, we experience different ways that we crack. And when we crack, what happens is that we try to adjust to the world around us with the different insecurities and the different uncertainties we have of the world. And so many of us end up hiding away our bigger light, the bigger piece of matzah is put away because we're not sure if it's really safe, if it's going to be accepted, if it's going to be valued and celebrated by the people around us. So we put that bigger half of the matzah away and we show up to the world with a smaller piece of matzah, with a smaller version of ourself, with a Mitzrayim, a Meitzar version of ourself. And in the end, what we're trying to bring out is that actually connected to that smaller piece, it's not two separate things. Both pieces came from the same whole. In the end, that experience of the Meitzar itself is what ends up revealing the bigger piece of matzah, which is what we're all really waiting for on a personal, individual, and obviously, of course, collective level as well.
What about something unique from this Haggadah, especially specifically as it pertains to Magid, which is something that we're all used to reading year in, year out, seeing the classical Mefarshim? Perhaps you have something a little different, especially, I think, as listeners can already tell, the Haggadah is a little different, trying to make it relevant for today, so to speak.
Sure. So something, even just as a kid, I always noticed that was perplexing to me was this minhag of many kids saying the Manishtana in foreign languages, right? Coming home from yeshiva and having the Manishtana in all sorts of languages. Well, what's that about? No one even understands what they're saying. Why are we doing that? I never understood it. And what I think and what I developed in the Haggadah is that oftentimes when a person has questions in life, real questions, vulnerable questions, questions that have to do with pain that they've been through, have to do with Mitzrayim that they've been through, we don't just ask those questions straight out, because there is a vulnerability in those questions, and we're not sure how people are going to respond or take those questions. So when a person is unsure if they can really trust those around them, what they do is before they show all their cards, they start to hedge. You dip your toe in a little bit, you just check it out, feel it out a little, me show a little bit of what I'm feeling, but only a tiny bit. I mask it. Right, when I'm at the question with the question and answer session somewhere, I say, my friend has a question. I don't ask it myself, right? And I think the Manishtana itself is really about that, because the questions that we all have and that our inner child has are not really about leaning or sitting up straight. It's not really about how many times we dip. Really, what we're asking about is much deeper things, much more painful, vulnerable things. But the Manishtana masks it in the ritual questions. And then what we do, the minhag, is we not only mask it in the ritual, but we actually even say it in different languages, because we're just starting to emerge. And our job at the Seder is to allow those parts of us that are the more vulnerable parts, that are not just going to show up in a flash in a second, and to help them find that sense that this is a place where I actually I can be real, I can be raw, I can be authentic. As I said, I don't need the sources in the Haggadah. I can actually just show up and experience the Seder in a real way. And maybe that's a little bit of what this interesting minhag is about.
Is there anything that runs consistently throughout the entire Haggadah?
Yeah, so one of the things that I noticed in really trying to delve more deeply into the experience of the Haggadah is how many times the Haggadah actually brings us back. It actually relates to something you brought up earlier in our conversation today. It's how often, while the Haggadah on the one hand is about Geula and it's about Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Haggadah brings us back into focusing on the Mitzrayim, on the Shibud, on the darkness part of the experience so many times. So we start off Avadam Hayinu L'Par Mitzrayim, and then we leave. We go out of Mitzrayim. But then before we know it, we're back. And then we tell a story and we leave. But before we know it, we're back. We're doing Maror again. And then we leave, and we keep this movement of back and forth, going back and forth. And we don't just leave Mitzrayim. It's not just, okay, we were there, and now we can recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out. There's really a focus and an emphasis on the difficulty and on the shibud. And the Haggadah does not shy away from the rawness. Actually, even in one striking part of the Haggadah is where the Tanaim go through the amount of makos there were. And they elaborate, they enumerate that there were more than 10 makos and how many, and they count all of them. And I was thinking about this. The makos, of course, are Egiloi Shechina, they're a revelation of Hashem. But the makos are also really about afflicting pain and punishment on the Mitzrim. And again, the idea being that the Haggadah does not shy away from the raw goriness of what is happening in the world. And that's a very big part of the experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim, because only to the extent that a person is willing to look at and experience the darkness are they going to have that level of capacity to really bring out the light that's coming out in the world through the Haggadah? So the Haggadah wants us not to get chas v'shalom trapped or stuck in the negativity or the Mitzrayim. It's only for the Geula, for the Yetzias Mitzrayim. But to whatever degree a person is willing to go into that difficulty and vulnerability, that's how much of the light they're going to be able to bring out.
Who would you say the Haggadah is meant for?
I think the Haggadah is meant most for people who are already in a world where they are attuned to their inside life. People who are interested in something deeper. They have that sense that I've read amazing Perushim on the Haggadah. I've heard a great vart here, a great shtickle here, but I just feel like the Seder, it's calling for something more. It's not calling for a nice idea. The Seder, maybe my whole life I've been wondering, the Seder is supposed to be something so transformative. Where has that been? That's who this is for. And I would say, as a secondary category, it's for anyone who's intrigued by that concept. I think there's a lot of people out there who are already experiencing that sense of life, of there's something more, there's something deeper, I'm feeling something, I'm not just thinking something. And I think there's a lot of people who might not be experiencing that fully, but are very intrigued and very curious about the fact that so many people in the world are experiencing that. And this is a way of kind of helping a person enter into that space.
What are you trying to accomplish with this Haggadah?
So as I've mentioned, what I'm trying to accomplish is really to create an experience of the Seder. I think so many people have that experience that I just mentioned, which is, I don't understand. This is supposed to be something so deep, so profound, so transformative. And where is it? The Seder is beautiful, and maybe I have a beautiful time with my family, and maybe I have a nice Seder. But where is that Yetzias Mitzrayim? Where is that sense of what the Haggadah speaks that it's supposed to be doing?
Okay, so the Haggadah was published with Machon Ali Zayas. It's distributed in Israel by Separati Projects. It's distributed in America by Feldheim, so you can find it on Feldheim's website. You can find it on Ali Zayas' website. You can find it in Sfarim stores. You can find it on Amazon. And I'll link to a couple of those in the show notes for those interested in purchasing the Haggadah. And with that, thank you, Rabbi Danishevksy, for joining me to discuss the attached Haggadah.
Thank you.